That's my subtle hint. Good evening. I would like to welcome each of you to this grand opening of the Adler Graduate School's expanded library and the dedication of our two new research centers, Café Central and the Harold H. Mosak Adlerian Mastery Lab. You can actually applaud. A couple of logistical things before I introduce things. We will have a program tonight that goes kind of like this. Dr. Mosak is going to speak from 4:30 to 5:30. Between 5:30 and 6:15, there's a reception, a catered reception, on the other side of this floor. And at 6:15, we'll come back here for a program. And that program will include guest speakers, including Dr. Mosak, and we'll be celebrating these two new research centers in particular. And I do want you to know that there's an hour after that, between 7:30 and 8:30, where if you choose to stay, you don't have to, but if you choose to stay, we're going to have conversations with the president of the North American Society of Adlerian Psychology, Jill Duba-Sauerheber, and Ellen Mandel from the New York Society of Adlerian Psychology. And I also want to let you know that right after this, at 5:30, when we're having our reception, you will be free if you choose to visit those research centers. They will be open. And so we want to make this a celebration. They're not going to remain under lock and key. So again, welcome. We're really, really proud to host each of you, along with our honored guest, Marion Balla from Ottawa, Dr. Harold Mosak from Chicago, Dr. Jill Duba-Sauerheber, President of the North American Society of Adlerian Psychology, from Bowling Green, Kentucky, Ellen Mandel, as I mentioned, from New York and the New York Society of Adlerian Psychology, and Dr. John Neubauer, Executive Director for NASAP from Fort Wayne, Indiana. So people have come, in some cases, a long way to visit with us tonight. Four of these guests, along with Dr. Marina Bluestein, who directs Adlerian Psychology and Online Education here at the Adler Graduate School, will be speaking to us later this evening. To start things off, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Dr. Harold Mosak, who has traveled here this weekend from Chicago, along with his son Neil, Neil's wife Ellen, and their son, Dr. Mosak's pride and joy, his grandson, DJ, who will serve as his grandfather's ribbon cutter tonight. I am proud to have known Dr. Mosak since 1988, when he was helping to found the Adler Graduate School. But suffice it to say, his roots here in Minnesota and the Adlerian community worldwide go much deeper. I don't think I would be overstating Dr. Mosak's influence in describing him as a giant in Adlerian psychology and a pillar in the field of mental health in general. He has counseled clients and trained students, mental health professionals, educators, and parents from around the world. According to the principles, of course, of Alfred Adler's individual psychology. In following these principles, in both his personal and professional spheres, Dr. Mosak is widely recognized as one of the world's foremost Adlerian scholars and teachers for more than 6 decades. Dr. Mosak is a co-founder of what has become Adler University in Chicago, and as I said, has also helped to build the Adler Graduate School here in Minnesota. Dr. Mosak, I want you to know that your friends here in Minnesota, and especially your co-founders, some of whom are in the audience tonight, also consider you a founder of the Adler Graduate School. Am I right, Tom and Sue? Dr. Mosak served the Adler Graduate School as a visiting instructor for approximately 25 years. In fact, he has been so instrumental to the development of the Adler Graduate School that in recent years, our board of directors chose to name him an emeritus faculty member and an honorary board member, honors that will survive in perpetuity. Now that's a fine biography, no question, and it gives you a glimpse of Dr. Mosak, but now I want to tell you a little bit about my friend Harold. A few things that his family and friends might treasure. Harold has mentored countless mental health professionals, and several of these mentees are here with us this evening. People who are proud to have been Harold's students, but now perhaps even prouder to be his colleagues and friends. As I said, I met Harold in 1988 as a postdoctoral student preparing to teach Herod eggs. And shortly thereafter, Harold and I became teaching colleagues, particularly in the areas of psychopathology, an area where eggs had 2 courses at the time, Psychopathology 1 and Psychopathology 2. To be honest, I always preferred following Harold by teaching Psychopathology 2 instead of preceding him with Psychopathology 1, because then I didn't have to worry about Harold noticing the things that I either missed or got wrong. Unfortunately, though, in part because I was worrying about impressing Harold, it took me a while to notice what a really nice man he is. Since then, though, I've had many conversations with Harold, and I've always tried to make a point of visiting him when I traveled to Chicago. In fact, one of the last times I visited Harold, we met at Adler University, where he continues to teach and consult. And we spoke for about an hour that day, and as I was getting up to leave, Harold said to me, "You know, Dan, you're seeing something today that you don't often see." I said, "Well, what's that, Harold?" He said, "Well, I'm not using my walker." And indeed, he had come all the way up, he had come all the way down to meet me from upstairs, and he was moving slowly but assuredly, and he was not using his walker. And then he said to me as I was going, he said, "You know, Dan, you're always welcome here." And I said, "I know that, Harold, thank you." He says, "No, no, no." He says, "You're always welcome here." And I can't tell you how much that touched me. And as I said, Harold's son Neil, Neil's wife Ellen, and grandson DJ are also with us this evening, and a more loving family you will never find. In fact, their devotion to Harold jumps out at you the moment you see the 4 of them together. Like Harold, Neil and I have also had many conversations, and he has spoken freely about frequently about his father's character. He frequently says, for example, that more than anyone else, his father has taught him about humility, and taught him that it is cool to not be cool. Cool, that is, when you don't try too hard to impress others, and when you're comfortable in your own skin. One of the nicest things Harold has said to me is that he truly enjoys coming to Minnesota, and that this is the one place to which he is still willing to come as a lecturer. And that, my friends, is a true compliment to not only the school but the mental health community we are building here in Minnesota. So Harold, welcome back to Minnesota. Words can't describe how happy we are to host you this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just turn on the mic. Thank you.
I came here.
Wait, Dan.
Thank you.
Incidentally, if you want to know who that is, he does have a name and that kind of thing. If you look at your copy of Early Recollections, the publisher put a picture of him about 2 or 3 years ago. So he is sort of the co-host today. Does that do it, Neil? Well, we'll have to say more about you then. At any rate, I see some of you are standing, and there are some lovely seats here. And as the Bible says, the last shall be first. So how about those of you who came in last, occupy these seats here so that I don't feel so lonely up here all by myself. I only eat one student before lunch, and I'm already It's always good to come to Minneapolis, and that's not some puffery and that kind of thing. I have a history here earlier than Dan told you. We had a Minnesota Society of Adlerian Psychology, and by accident, somebody, not an Adlerian, invited me to speak to the State Social Workers Convention. And I did a demonstration there of family guidance and family counseling. And they invited me as an afterthought to talk to some people who professed to be Adlerians, but were very, very lonely up here because there were so few of them. And they decided, with the urging of Bill Pugh and some other people here and myself, to form an Adlerian formal society. And I agreed to help out, and I agreed to come up and speak to the small group of Adlerians that existed here for free. That's not to boast, it's part of the story. And I spoke to the 10 to 15 self-identified Adlerians, and then they decided to host me. But the society had something like $15, all of which they gave me to pay for my expenses to come from Chicago. So the society not having any money, I took them all across the street to a hotel. I don't remember the name of it anymore, but it was across a church which had as its pastor an Adlerian. And I picked up the check. So except for the whatever it was I taught them in the brief time I spoke, financially it was a total loss. So I'm glad to see so many people filling seats here, and I hope you're paying. Because I already see Dan worried. I've been telling people that this is probably my last professional presentation. I will turn 94 in a few months, and traveling is tough. So I surrendered on September 30th my license in Illinois, where I was the oldest living practicing clinical psychologist in Illinois at the time. And I hope to be able to resist the requests, the invitations from some of my friends here, not to give up here and that kind of thing. And I did promise Dad that this would be the only place I would accept invitations to speak, because in many, many ways, Chicago and Minneapolis are my home base in Adlerian psychology. I have another connection here. The Army in 1943 put me here for 6 months, so I was here before some of you were even here. And that will leave me just with a full-time teaching job as a teacher, and that ought to hold me until it comes time to go. Today I would like to talk with you about a topic I've been wrestling with for at least 40 years. I've never discussed it. I've never written on it. But I've told myself, like many practitioners do, gee, somebody ought to write on the topic. But it never occurred to me that I ought to be the one to do it. That topic is love, more specifically, love of self, because I'm not going to now talk about all the facets of love that are being discussed. And never fear, I'm not going to talk about narcissism, even if it's called self-love. narcissism seems to be the only form of self-love. Well, like so many other things in psychology, if it has something to do with pathology, we want to talk about it, worry about it, that kind of thing. If it has something to do with just plain old normal behavior, who cares about that? Well, think about it for a moment. Just about every major university, college in the United States, and I'm not just referring to the big ones, little ones, they all have at least one course in abnormal psychology. Did you go to a college, if you went to college, where they had a course entitled Normal Psychology? Well, normal. We're not interested in that. Make it pathological, and by golly, we'll talk about that topic forever. And the unfortunate part is, as I've learned lately, is that pathology is something which can't even be defined in most cases. They're coming out with DSM-5 now, and they're not satisfied with it and send it back for revision because they can't really figure out what pathology is, but they know how to treat it. So, I'm not going to be talking about narcissism and stuff like that. I'm going to be talking about you and how you feel and that kind of thing. And again, I'm not going to be able to discuss all of that in an hour either, but at least I would like to kindle an interest in the topic, so that your reading, your research, your work eventually will venture into the area of normality rather than stay where people like Freud left it 100 years ago. All we're interested in it is something which is abnormal. Now, Freud had little use for the concept of love. He makes it quite clear. He doesn't like the concept. He doesn't use it hardly. And when asked, along with Adler, about being one's brother's keeper, he says, why should I be my brother's keeper? If I met a stranger in the woods, he'd probably want to kill me. So you can see he was a great lover of mankind. I think the device was he stabbed me in the back, but I read it so long ago, I can't be sure of that. But he would be up to no good if he met the stranger in the woods. Now, Adler didn't do much better. Since Freud had little use for Adler and for his theories, you ought not to be surprised that Freud condemned Adler for, quote, creating a psychology without love. That's a direct quote. And Freud was not far off the mark, because there's only one thing you'll know about love, really know, if you read either Freud or Adler, especially Adler. It is a normal concern, and we're not concerned with the normal. And secondly, the topic of love is one of the three tasks of life. After that, as what they say in court, the affiant says nothing. You won't know anything about love, you won't know anything about work, you won't know anything about the social meanderings of mankind. There's one topic in the area that is related to love, and it is a nothing area as Adlerians practice it. Does anybody know what is the major topic about love and work and that Adlerians fool around with? Well, that seems like a reasonable answer. I don't see a hand showing. You will find articles in our recent journals about whether there are 3 life tasks, as Adler said several times, especially in chapters of books, or 5 tasks of life, as Dreikers and I said, and some other number, always an odd number, incidentally. I don't know why that is, but it makes good research. And you get articles saying so-and-so is right and so-and-so is wrong because they have this many life tasks or that many life tasks or whatever. And then the debate stops. As I read those articles, I have a thought, and that is that these people who write these articles are really adding a 4th life task, and that 4th life task that employs the energies of many Adlerians is how many life tasks there are. And what they don't realize is that they are really dealing with a fundamental non-Adlerian question, and that is, into how many slices can you cut a pie? What difference does it make? You can cut it into no slices for that matter, or leave it as 1 slice, or you can have an infinite number of slices. It adds nothing to the theory, only to the number of people who are willing to eat. And a lot of Adlerians are willing to eat a lot of pie. So, I leave that to other people to wrestle with. I don't think I have a long time to go in life, and I think that there are more interesting and more important topics than how many life tasks there are. The interesting thing is, like something I've already mentioned, is Adlerians cannot define what a life task is. The word used by Adler was German, Aufgabe. And Aufgabe has about a dozen meanings. So some people use this meaning and some use that. Do you know why they speak of the 3 or 5 life tasks? Because some translator decided that Aufgabe, a translator who was not a psychologist, incidentally, decided that Aufgabe meant task. Well, since most people don't know German, they just took the translator's word for it. And consequently, we have 3 life tasks, or 5 life tasks, or 7 life tasks, depending on who you ask. But it won't make any difference to you, so I suggest not asking. So, in the early or mid-60s, Dreikers and I expanded on Adler's work, and we said instead of there being just 3 life tasks, there were 5 life tasks. And people like to refer to that in the literature. Either we support Dreikers and Mosak, or against, we don't support Dreikers and Mosak and the number of tasks that people are engaged in. And, you know, I have since repudiated my 1960s remarks published in our journal Because basically, if you really understand, there's only one life task, and that life task is survival. If you don't survive, you don't have to worry about the other parts. So if you are interested in life tasks, ask yourself how do people manage to survive, or in some instances, not to psychologically at least survive. So that's just a bit about my introduction to the life tasks. Now, Albert Ellis, who, if you don't know it, was also a member of the Adlerian Society, the National Adlerian Society, wrote a couple of articles in our journal. And one of the articles, he says, what I say and what Adler said are basically the same thing, which is why Ray Corsini sent him a membership card for NASAP. He said the only difference between what Adler says and what I say is that Adler says what is in the social interest is also in the best self-interest. In contrast, Ellis says, I say that what is in the self-interest, if you look out for yourself, it is in the social interest. And you can take your pick of views. Mine somewhat resembles Ellis, but not completely. But for Ellis, this was an either-or proposition. Either you're for yourself and that kind of thing, or you're for the other guy, like Adler says. You have, quote, social interest, unquote, which is an other-centered term, basically. If you care for the other, if you're compassionate toward the other, and if you're cooperative with the other, you are, and this is a misnomer in term, you have social interest. I wrote a paper several years ago, and this makes me, I think, the only Adlerian, at least who publicly has stated it. I don't have social interest. This started some Adlerians, but basically, psychology of Adler is a psychology not of possession, not of what you have, but one of use, what you do with what you have. The first view, which Adler's students and even Adler says, is that everybody has or is born with social interest. Well, if they're all born with social interest, it doesn't matter whether they have it or not, because they all have it. And consequently, you're reduced to the view of a psychology of use. You have it, you're born with it, according to them. And if you're born with it, the only question is, do you do anything with it? Do you do anything useful with it? Or do you just have it, and like many things you have, you don't pay any attention to it. You just have it. So, Ellis's view is that basically people should be and are oriented toward themselves. But you either are other-centered or you are self-centered. And that's a dangerous word in psychology, because the minute you use self-centered, you'll be accused of being a narcissist. So, he comes closest to what Adler speaks about, but then later doesn't use. We all have social interest, and that kind of thing. But social interest runs secondary to self-interest, so that's the thing. It's an either-or proposition. My own view, after struggling with these concepts for a long time, resembles that of a rabbi of a couple of thousand years ago named Hillel. Can you hear back there? Yes. Well, I saw you holding your ear, and I wondered whether only the first half of the audience was hearing me. Hillel, many scholars of ancient times or of the Bible, is alleged to have been Jesus' teacher because their concepts are so very close. So Hillel said, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Hillel put it in the other way, and that is, don't do to anybody else what you wouldn't have them do to you. But for Hillel, it was not the same as for Albert Ellis. Hillel felt it is not only possible to have social interest and self-interest simultaneously, but it is necessary to have both simultaneously. So he made a statement in a philosophical paper or book: if I am not for myself, who will be? In other words, you gotta look after yourself, you gotta feed yourself, you gotta work, you gotta do all those things that increase your self-interest. And at the same time, Hillel says, but if I am only for myself, the narcissistic approach, what kind of human being am I really? I'm not very much of a human being. So for Ellis, it was either or, and for me, as for Hillel, it is both. So we find people trying to dodge this problem because they cannot solve it. And your patients sometimes come in and say, I would do that, but it seems so selfish. And it's not selfish many times. It's just something you gotta do for yourself. You can't get somebody to take an education for you. You gotta do that yourself. And if you don't do that yourself, who's gonna do it for you, Hillel asked. And I asked the same thing. So you have to do both. But how in a society which focuses so much on right and wrong and fault and blame and discouraging people, how can you really develop a love for yourself? After all, your parents are very fond of telling you what you did wrong, what you may be going to do wrong, and that kind of thing. You go to a Catholic school, and this has changed in Catholic schools most recently. If you talk in class, you don't get merely a small slap on the wrist. You're invited by the nun to kneel in a corner and pray for your immortal soul. And by golly, that is really something that will make you not like yourself if you die and you go down there. So we discourage people in the educational system, and we Adlerians, spend a lot of time thinking and talking about education. And there's some simple things that we could do to reverse what teachers are doing these days. But we don't think about that because the culture many times will forbid us from either thinking about it or practicing that way. So if you take a spelling test, you're a child, and you get the long spelling paper back, etc., what's the first thing you're going to see? How many you got wrong? And in addition to that, it will be graded with a red pencil or with red ink. And we know what that means, because in business, when you are failing, you are in the red. See? So, it would be simple to get a pencil which was not red, etc., and reverse some of this. So, in working with teachers, let's say in a spelling test or any test, get out the red pencil and start making crosses or arrows, saying this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, and then giving a grade of efficiency in some topic. They continue to grade in the old way. And the first thing a child sees when he gets back his paper is, I am deficient, and so much deficient. Now, what if instead, let's say in a 20-word spelling test paper, if the teacher, instead of making check marks, saying this spelling is wrong and that spelling is wrong, what if you put C for correct next to each word spelled right? Well, we don't want children to know that. They might become too complacent and become terrible spellers if you tell them that they're doing it right. So they keep up the same spelling kind of thing and discourage children by not emphasizing what you do well, what you do correctly, what kind of good human being you are, in favor of it. You're a lousy human being, you don't do, and I'm going to use a word that parents and teachers love. Never and always. It isn't bad enough that the child just now committed an error. You always do that. Why is it you always? Why is it you never? Etc. So the crime that the child has committed becomes just overwhelming almost. And all of them require is just putting a C rather than putting an arrow and using a different colored pencil. So, as I said, parents do it, teachers do it, and we as adults, whether parents or teachers or other, because we've been raised in the same kind of society, do the same thing. And I know of very few forces which are more discouraging than American education. What is wrong, as one Adler said, in catching the child doing something right? Hey, this is a nice paper. You spell so beautifully. Your handwriting is so legible. You can hardly read what you write. And Adler taught us differently. Somewhere he writes about a child guidance session he held in Vienna. And the teachers participated there, said, I don't know what grade to give this child because his handwriting is so illegible, I can't make out what he just wrote. So they called the child in, and Adler was given a paper that the child had written. And the child, of course, knew what was going to come out. Everybody was disappointed in his penmanship. And Drager's was going to be equally disappointed. And directors held up the paper and said, you know, you make this letter, I think it was the E, but I don't remember anymore, so beautifully. How about trying to make one more letter as beautifully as the first one you made? And he used the encouraging approach and non-over-ambitious approach. He didn't ask him to redo the whole paper. Just one letter, do better, and you'll be just that much better off. So, we have to change our cultural expectations regarding other people's behavior as well as our own, because in changing their behavior, we'll change our own. You may get the fiction that the idea that children were not put in the world to drive their parents crazy, that they have some other function. And if you give the child the kinds of things that directors speaks of and others speak of in their papers on raising children, education, and that kind of thing, you will get children who behave better rather than worse. Now, that's going to be hard. It's a rather simple thing to do, but it's going to be hard to do it. Because some people are so devoted, they don't know anything different. They've been raised that way, are so devoted to the you're wrong, that's sufficient, we'll punish you kind of culture that it never occurs to them to change. And we have an example in my household with my daughter, who's now not a child anymore, brought home a spelling paper of her own when she was a child. And she showed it to us, but she didn't know what the heck it meant. The grade you will love, especially if, like me, you were a mathematician. The grade, in red, of course, was -0. When I was raised in arithmetic and math in high school and college, they kept that a secret from me. In fact, they told me that 0 had no sign. It was neither minus nor was it plus. It just was. But it was unsigned. So I decided to find out what was wrong, since it was in red, what was wrong with my daughter's paper, and whether the 0 was a good mark or a bad mark. So I called the teacher, and she thought I was pretty dumb. Really. It means the absence of anything wrong. Isn't that profound? When you can just put all correct or 100 or nice paper or something. The absence of anything wrong. We always have to be concerned with right and wrong, and of course the other things that go with it, blame and punishment and that kind of thing. So, the changes that I encourage people to make are not merely restricted to education. And I invite you to think with me about some simple methods for catching anyone doing right. Because the methods are only, old methods, are only appropriate for a competitive society. if you want to know who's better and who's smarter and who's worse and who's bad, these methods of grading and working with kids, etc., have seen their best days. We have to come up with other kinds of stuff. I was teaching in Toronto to the Adler school there about 30 years ago, and we had dinner, some teachers and I, and on the way back to my hotel, one teacher said to me that, and she had a name for it, McTavish or something like that, technique that you taught us about really works good. And I said, what's a McTavish technique? Oh, come on, Dr. Mosak, you spoke on it. And I said, really, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm glad you like it, but tell me what it is so I can tell other teachers about it and have them like it and find it useful. So she told me. I advocated that at the beginning of the semester, not the first day, but at the beginning of the semester, after a few weeks, let's say, the child should write, the teacher should write home, not a long missive, but a short statement, 1, 2, or 3 statements about at least one thing that that child does well. Now, this is considered nutty, outrageous behavior on the part of a teacher. Because when do you write a letter home to the parents? When the child is in a negative position. He's done something wrong, he hasn't turned in his work. And when the parent gets that letter, even before opening, he or she knows what's inside. And the parent is supposed to do something about it. If the parent could do something about it, they'd probably be teachers. No, they probably wouldn't. And in this, write 1 or 2 positive comments about the child. Now this changes a whole lot of things. For one thing, it changes the parent-teacher conference. Because in the parent-teacher conference, the parent comes prepared to fight with the teacher. My child doesn't do it often. When he does do it, etc., your punishment is too harsh, and you're the teacher, what the hell do you want me to do about it? And here, when a teacher gets a letter like this from the child's teacher, it reverses things. The teacher is welcome with whatever points are made. The child stops fighting the teacher, because how can you fight somebody who's on your side? It's hard. And the teacher very obviously is on the child's side, because nobody makes her or him write the letter home, etc. It's something that the teacher spontaneously, voluntarily wants to do. And the child loses much of his fight and finds encouragement to do some things that he would give his life almost not to do without this kind of encouragement. So, I'm glad to hear that the school system that PJ is leading right now to go to high school somehow or other learned of this McTavish policy too. So we got this a couple of weeks ago. And just to make sure the message is received, after the teacher has written a note, the principal sticks her nose in and says, "Great job, keep it up." Mrs. Hawes? Holly. Holly?
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to do something about her writing. To the parents/guardians of Darren Mosak, this letter is to inform you of how wonderful it has been to have Darren in class. He always comes in with a great attitude and ready to work. He also volunteers to help one of our special needs students, an autistic student, and works fantastically with him. I very much enjoy being his teacher. That ain't gonna demoralize him. Now some teachers tell me, gee, I can't do that. It would take so long to do. Well, first of all, it doesn't take that long to do. No. And secondly, it's time saving. Because if you send a little note like that, you'll reduce misbehavior in classes considerably, and we won't have to deal with misbehavior regularly. And these are little tricks in the positive sense that good teachers know. For example, I was teaching a class of teachers in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And I said, it's an open session, you can ask anything you want. I'm not sure I can answer everything, but we'll take a crack at it. And one teacher said, what do you do with that little boy, he's present in every class, who walks with a pencil sharpener when everybody is working and makes sure that he trips over everybody's feet on the way to the pencil sharpener, or who has to stop for a chat with every child in the row, as he was saying, and that kind of thing. And I said to this teacher, what do you do currently when this child gets out of his chair and starts making a move toward the pencil sharpener? And the usual answers came. We threaten, we punish, and that kind of thing. And we came to one teacher, a very young teacher, first year in the educational system, and she already knew what to do. She said to the rest of her group, I never had that problem. Oh, you must have an all-girls class. Of course, girls never do anything. They're made of sugar and spice and everything nice. And they came up with reasons why this teacher had no problems of this kind. And she said, none of that is true. I just figured something out. When Johnny gets out of his seat, before he takes one step toward the pencil sharpener, I say to Johnny with a smile on my face, not a threat or anything, a smile on my face. Johnny, please take your seat, or I'm going to come over and kiss you. Now, for a young child in the 3rd grade, or a young boy, that's a fate worse than death. The other boys in your class will taunt you about it forever. I know, because my 4th grade teacher did kiss me. I actually spelled a 6th grade word. It made an impression on me. The word was sleigh, S-L-E-I-G-H. which only 6th graders are supposed to be able to spell, not 4th graders. And she was so flabbergasted, she walked up to my seat, etc., and she kissed me. I could not live down the thoughts. So there are these kinds of things, and many teachers know them. They don't even have to be taught them. They know them because they think about children, and they don't think about the things that they learned in college in Education 101. So, I still recommend, when I teach teachers, the use of the, whatever the name is, because we have something interesting in Adlerian psychology and in other psychologies too. And that is, we know all the answers except we don't know what to do. So if you want a happy child in school or at home, the thing to do is to encourage them. Encourage, in a sense, is other-centered love. I'm going to do something positive vis-a-vis you. And I asked my students, well, what would you do in this particular case? Johnny is this and this and this and this. Now, you're the teacher, you're the parent, what would you do about it? Oh, they all know the answer to that. And if I give an exam, they certainly know the answer. And that is, I would encourage them. But then I kill them with the next one. Give one encouraging technique you would use in the above case. They know nothing. All they know are the right answers. My high school biology teacher was right. He said, if you don't know the answer, write down osmosis. It'll usually be right. They write down, that's an inferiority complex, or, you know, one of the Adlerian catchphrases, but they don't know how to use it. Now, many of you know I'm an advocate of using humor in education, or using humor in psychotherapy. I've written a book on it and that kind of thing. And I teach my students about humor. Well, I would tell them a joke. Okay, I'm your student, and I'm failing. Tell me a joke. They can't tell me a joke, not even a bad joke. So, Adlerian students and teachers have catchphrases, and they know what to do in almost every instance, and they never can do anything. So, we have to change that feeling in teachers and parents, and that is, I can rather than I can't. And most of the time, well, when teachers consult me, they say, I've tried everything. And they forget what Adler said when somebody said that to him. Everything but one. There's still one more thing you can look for and try. You haven't found it yet. Let's see if you can find it. See? So, these techniques mostly work. Almost intuitively, you would feel that if you presented a person with this kind of answer or solution or whatever, it probably would work. If you send home a note like this to the parents, I don't think the parents will generally say, and who cares about the teacher? They'll usually feel, gee, that's a nice thing. I may not share that view, He may not be as great a talent in one venue as in the other venue, but at least it was nice of her to write. She's apparently interested in children or some such thing like that. But when it comes to yourself, you forget all the lessons, or at least many of the lessons that you were taught on encouragement. And much of the time, in spite of the fact that you are very, very gifted people, not only great intellectual giants and practitioners, but you are gifted people, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten, you wouldn't be sitting here. You resort to inferiority feelings. And for inferiority feelings, it's just another name for no self-love. I am less than you are, than he is, etc. That means I don't like myself well enough. So I'm going to leave you today with something that never fails. And I know you're going to think now or later, well, I know of an instance, even if it has to do with me, where it did fail. And here I just ask you to be a bit lenient and say it and accept it never fails in Gilbert and Sullivan terms. What, never? Well, hardly ever. If you want to like yourself no matter what, it doesn't matter what points, what grades, whatever it is you get. There are people who get wonderful points, grades, adulation, etc. But they themselves know if they really knew me and what's in my heart and in my skin, they wouldn't like me because I'm deficient here, etc., etc., etc. And similarly, there are people who don't have very much points or good grades or whatever, and they think they're the greatest. So your evaluation of yourself is an evaluation. It is something you decide to give yourself. It doesn't matter what your grade actually is. You can interpret it as wonderful, or you can interpret it as not so wonderful. So here's a way of always thinking you may not be the greatest thing that God ever created, but you are, to use TA terms, okay. Now, I'd like you for the present to think of something this way. Let's create an image of your head, your brain, your mind, whatever it is you want to call it, as composed of two hemispheres. In this hemisphere, you have memories of all the good things you are and all the good things you've done and all of the successes you've had. Now, if you sit down to evaluate yourself, nobody else is around to evaluate you. What are you going to think of yourself if you just focus on all of your successes, your good ones, etc.? Since there are no bad points, not that there are no bad points, but none that you're focused on, you're going to think you're okay. Now, think of this side of your brain or mind or whatever, and in it are all your bad points, all the things you've done wrong, all of your lacks of success, and that kind of thing. And you don't give any attention to any of this stuff. It's there, but you don't give any attention to any of the good stuff over here. What are you going to think of yourself? I'm not okay. So it is not a matter of what good points you have and what successes you have or haven't had. It's a matter of what I keep focused on. If you keep focused on all the good stuff, you'll go around liking your stuff. Gee, I've succeeded here, I have this good thing, etc., etc. Sometimes I have two good advice. And if you focus instead on this and keep thinking of how you lost this stuff and what a failure you are and all of those kinds of things, you'll think very, very little of yourself. You will have very, very little self-love. So self-love is not an echo of what others think of you. It is what you think of you, regardless of what's happening. Because you can always choose to focus on the other thing rather than the negative thing you may be focused on. Now, I choose to keep focused here. When I think of my successes, when I think of my good points and that kind of thing, I have a good opinion of myself. And feeling good about myself, I feel people will generally feel good about me. After all, a person who does the right thing generally and is successful is worthy of being liked. So, given that, it's not what you have, again, echoing Adler, but what you decide to do about it. I choose to like myself. It's not anything narcissistic. But I value myself, I value my work, I value my successes, I value my relationships with other people and all of that thing. And for free, it seems every time it comes to Minneapolis, I'm giving something away for free. I'm going to let you use it all you want. I hope you will join me on focusing on this side. Thank you. I would rise, excuse me, I would rise to the occasion if I could.
So, what a sense of timing without ever looking at his watch, huh?
Of course.
You know, I always say that in this field it's not enough to be smart, you really have to aspire to wisdom. And if you aren't inspired tonight to aspire to wisdom, you never will be. So thank you. I'm going to use the McTavish approach here. And say that was a really, really good lecture.
My mother will enjoy that.
You know, you should write children's books.
I thought of it.
Folks, thank you for being so attentive. I know you have honored Dr. Mosak tonight, so thank you for being here. And enjoy the reception and enjoy the rooms that Marina will lead you through. And we'll be back here at 6:15 for a program, okay? And please join us for that too. Thank you.
Thank you.